23:40 hours, December 29th, 1944. Muir Field, Muro, north of the Philippine Islands. The Black Widow shuddered as Major Carroll C. Smith hauled her off the pierced steel runway and into the black. The takeoff lights at Muir vanished almost instantly behind them, swallowed by low cloud and Pacific haze. 1 second, there were faint glows on the horizon. The next, there was nothing. No moon, no stars, just the faint red glow of instruments and the white ghost of breath fogging inside an aluminum coffin. Smith, 26 years old, leaned into his harness and stared into a void that might as well have been painted onto the canopy. He saw nothing. He never did on nights like this. The only thing that mattered was the voice behind him. Contact bearing 035, range 5 miles. Speed 180 knots. Angels 8. Lieutenant Philip Porter's voice was calm, almost bored, in the intercom. Smith pushed the throttles forward, feeling the twin Pratt Whitney R-2800s answer with a deeper, more urgent roar. The vibration came up through his boots and seat, a physical reminder that each engine was throwing out 2,000 horsepower into the night. 035, Angels 8, got it. Smith trimmed the P-61, eyes flicking over the instruments. Airspeed creeping past 200, rate of climb needle steady at 2,000 feet per minute. Artificial horizon the only thing between him and a blind stall into the sea. He still couldn't see a damn thing. Below him, 20,000 Americans lay in canvas tents on a half-finished airfield hacked out of jungle and coral. Engineers, aviation mechanics, infantry support, radar crews, men who'd spent the last 2 weeks diving into slit trenches as Japanese bombers hunted them every night. 334 air raid alerts in 14 days. 12 enemy bombers reported inbound again tonight. Doctrinally, one night fighter was a bandage on an amputee. Smith knew the math. 1 P-61 against 12. His fuel gave him maybe 3 hours in the air, less if he ran the engines hard. If he spent 10 minutes riding the tail of each target, finding it, closing, making sure it went down, he might get 3, maybe 4 at best, which meant 8 or 9 would slip through, dump their loads on the airstrip, on the fuel farms, on the ammunition piles, on men asleep in cots. Porter broke back in. "You've got more than one out there, Major. 4 returns now. Spread in altitude, same track, north to south, all heading for home plate." Silence for a beat. Only the hum of the instruments and the distant thunder of the engines. Smith had been flying combat for 18 months. 43 missions, 4 confirmed kills. New Guinea, the Bismarcks, the steaming endless dark of the Southwest Pacific. He'd seen what Japanese bombers did to thin-skinned airfields like Muir. Tonight was different. Tonight he was not going to sit over the base like a nervous guard dog, waiting for them to come to him for a fair fight. Fair fights at night got people killed. He glanced at the little grease pencil lines he'd drawn on the left canopy frame that afternoon. Deflection marks, improvised sight references tuned to 20 and 40 degrees at typical closing speeds. Another unofficial mod no one at right field had blessed. And behind his seat, bolted into the fuselage, was the more serious sin, the dorsal turret stripped of its heavy drive motors and most of its ammunition. The 4 1/18 crew chiefs had pulled nearly 600 pounds off this Black Widow, in violation of a neat stack of technical orders. The official line was that the turret obstructed the radar field anyway. Unofficially, it let Smith's P-61 climb and accelerate like no P-61 had any right to. 4 bandits, Porter repeated. Closest at 4 miles, farthest at about 10. They're strung out, same track, same speed. 1 P-61, 4 bombers in his scope already, more somewhere beyond. Smith tightened his gloved hand on the control yoke. He could play this by the book, take the nearest target, ride its tail until it was a fireball or a confirmed splash, then move on. He'd save a few men on the ground. The rest would take their chances. Or he could try the plan that had been eating at him since the second week of these raids, the one his CO had called creative, with the kind of tone that meant, If this goes wrong, I never heard of it. He couldn't see the bombers, but his radar operator could see their route. Phil, Smith said slowly, you still think they're using that same pipeline? Up from the north, straight down the slot to Muir? Last 6 nights say yes, Major, Porter replied. Same bearing, same speeds, same IP, like a train schedule. Then we're not waiting on the platform tonight. Smith banked the black W. Edow, rolling her into the darkness. The G-forces pressed him sideways in the harness. Vector me to the farthest one, not the nearest. There was a pause. You want the tail end, Charlie? Porter asked. No, Smith said. I want the lead. We're going to run the line backward. He shoved the throttles up to Mito, flirting with emergency power. The engines bellowed. Fuel flow needles jumped. Somewhere far out in the dark, 12 Japanese bomber crews believed they were invisible. Behind them, riding the same black air, was a single aircraft they did not know existed, an all-black, twin-boom silhouette with electronic eyes in its nose, stripped turret, and a pilot about to bet the lives of 20,000 men on a stupid idea. Heading 035, Porter said, voice suddenly tighter. Climb to 10,000, lead Bandit, 10 miles. If we miss it, we're way the hell out over the water. Smith eased the nose up. The Black Widow clawed its way deeper into the night. If his plan worked, 4 bombers would disappear in the next 80 minutes. If it didn't, they'd never find his wreckage. Cut to black. Back home in Kansas, they said Carroll Smith had bad eyes for a farmer and good eyes for a pilot. Nearsighted enough that he'd squinted at chalkboards, but with a gift for reading instruments like other men read faces. He hadn't grown up wanting to fly at night. No one did. Night was for sleeping, for listening to wind in the wheat, not R-2800s clawing up through cloud. When the war came, they stuck him in trainers like everyone else, BT-13 Valiants, AT-6 Texans, Texas Sun, open cockpits, blue sky from horizon to horizon. He was good, better than average, but nothing special. It was the instrument phase that changed things. Most trainees dreaded the hood, opaque canvas that turned the cockpit into a blind cylinder. They'd sweat over the panel, panicking the first time the instructor killed the horizon and told them to fly on gauges alone. Smith relaxed. The more they took away his eyes, the steadier he got. Attitude indicator, turn and bank, VSI, needle and ball. He could feel what the airplane was doing and match it to the instruments. An instructor wrote on his training report. Unusually comfortable under the hood, calm, detail-oriented, recommending consideration for instrument or night flying roles. By mid-43, that meant Orlando Army Airfield and the strange, secretive world of night fighters. Doctrine said night interception was a system, not a pilot. Ground-based radar stations. Controllers in dark trailers plotting phosphorescent dots on plexiglass. VHF radios. Tall antennas bristling along the coasts and island chains. The job of the pilot was to listen, follow headings, obey vectors, and trust the disembodied voice that steered him up under another airplane, whose crew never knew he was there until the guns spoke. The first machines they gave the 418th Night Fighter Squadron were compromises. Douglas P-70 Havocs, A-20 bombers with a radar stuffed in the nose, and most of the bomb load ripped out. Blunt, overweight, short on range and climb. The SCR-540 radar inside them was crude, designed for blimps and broad targets. Smith and his first radar operator, a kid from Ohio, did their training intercepts over the Florida coast. He learned the language of night fighting. Bogey, bearing 270, range 6, Angels 5, heading 090. Turn port to 240, begin climb, speed 180 indicated. Contact now at 2 o'clock, slightly above, closing rate 30 knots. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, often a mess. Radar returns washed out in ground clutter. Controllers juggled multiple tracks, while power flickered. Pilots misheard bearings. Fighters and bombers drifted past each other in the dark, invisible by a mile and a half. The 418th's early combat in New Guinea taught them that Doctrine had been written for England, for flat land and dense radar nets and well-lit airfields. New Guinea was a wall of black mountains and jungle and thunderstorms taller than any bomber. The P-70s were underpowered dogs in that world. Fighters meant to sneak up on lumbering Japanese bombers found themselves in desperate climbs just to get near their altitude. Ground radar was spotty or non-existent, so the squadron adapted. They flew from hacked-out jungle strips, half mud and half crushed coral. They flew by feel, by faint radio bearings, by guess, and often they failed. Smith watched bombers slide overhead, navigation lights blacked out, rumbling toward Australian supply bases and Allied strips. He listened to the distant thumps of explosions and clattered spoons in mess tents that suddenly went quiet as men looked up into the night. He learned something Doctrine didn't say out loud. At night, time mattered more than anything. Every minute spent wandering in the dark was another minute bombs were in the air over your people. The 418th got its first P-38s with experimental British AI, Mach-8 radar, bolted on their noses in early 1944. Better climb, better speed, but still a lash-up. The radar sets were temperamental. Sometimes they fried themselves with their own power surges. Smith flew them anyway, sometimes returning soaked in sweat from the effort of keeping the twin-engine fighter straight and level on instruments while his operator fought with an overheating set. The P-61 Black Widow arrived in the squadron that September. It was like stepping into the future. The Widow was big, but she wanted to fly at night. Her cockpit was a cathedral of green light, glowing dials, a steady 3-axis autopilot, responsive trim. The SCR-720 radar in her nose was orders of magnitude better. 6 miles of range, good elevation, discrimination, decent resistance to ground clutter. For once, Doctrine and machine lined up. Then they moved to Muro. The Philippine campaign shifted everything north. Suddenly, the 418th wasn't hunting isolated intruders over jungle depots. They were covering major invasion staging areas from coordinated Japanese raid streams. Construction at Muir Field never stopped. Bulldozers coughed coral dust by day. Engineers strung fuel lines and pierced steel matting into new runways. At night, the sirens wailed. Engines revved. Men dove for cover as Japanese bombers came in low, dropping fragmentation bombs and incendiaries across the half-finished airfields. The paper plan called for a web of night fighters, overlapping caps, strong ground radar. Reality delivered one operational P-61 at Muir on December 26, 1944. It belonged to Major Carroll C. Smith and Lieutenant Philip Porter. 3 days later, the Japanese sent 12 bombers. And every alarm, every crater on the airfield, every engineer killed with a shovel still in his hands, burned in Smith's memory as he climbed into the Black Widow that night, knowing that the Doctrine pages in stateside manuals had nothing to say about one aircraft standing between an entire invasion force and the dark. The first week at Muro was a clinic in frustration. The 418th rolled their P-61s out onto a runway still ringed with bulldozers and stacks of pierced steel planking. Ground radar was a skeleton crew with an improvised antenna thrown up on a hill, trying to make sense of echoes off the sea and the rising mountains inland. By the book, the night fighter's job was to fly a protective pattern over the target, racetrack or expanding square, waiting for ground controllers to call out a bandit and then turn them onto it. So Smith flew the patterns. In the blacked-out cockpit, with dim red lights on the gauges and the smell of hot bakelite insulation from the radar set behind him, he traced the same loops in the sky over and over. Left turn, level, right turn, climb, descend, waiting for the disembodied controller's voice. Night Fighter Able 1 controller. Bogey detected bearing 030, range 25, Angels 8. Suggest you steer 250 and climb to Angels 10. The vectors came late and uncertain. The Muir radar had been trucked in, reassembled in the mud, and barely calibrated. Peaks and cloud banks painted false blips. The radar techs did what they could, but half their work was with pliers and chewing gum. Smith obeyed the calls anyway. He'd swing out over the black water, Porter bending over his tiny flickering scope. trying to spot a whisper of an echo before it vanished. Too often, by the time they got a solid return, the bomber was already too close to the field. He'd claw up under the track, glimpse a darker shadow against the blackness, sometimes only at 300 yards, and fire a burst. Once he got close enough to see the green flashes of tracer from a tail gunner. He snapped into a climbing turn, pulled a high deflection shot, just like the training film said, and watched sparks walk up the bomber's fuselage in eerie slow motion. That one spy. Rayleigh down, burning. His 5th kill. But that was one bomber. The remaining 11 that night hit Muir. From the air, it looked like someone striking matches on the ground, brief bright flashes along the runways in Tent City. He could see secondary explosions where they hit fuel bowsers. He could feel the flak reaching up for them as panicked gunners on the ground blazed away at anything that sounded like engines. Back on the ground after that first raid, the mood in the operation shack was ugly. "The alerts say 12 bogeys," the G2 officer snapped, jabbing a pencil at the board. "You got one, Major. The Beaufort's boys claim another. That's 10 that got through. And we lost 43 men in the engineer battalion last night," another voice added quietly. "Plus, 1 runway out of commission until tomorrow afternoon. We can't keep absorbing that." Smith stared at the chalkboard. Tracks, times, estimated headings. It painted the same story. A stream of bombers coming down a corridor the men had started calling the slot. He thought about his time in New Guinea, chasing lone intruders. Then he thought about what they were facing now. "This isn't New Guinea," the squadron CO said, half to himself. "We're not dealing with dribs and drabs. This is scheduled traffic." Porter sat on a crate in the corner, still smelling of sweat and radar oil, flipping through his notebook. He logged every contact, altitude, bearing, speed, heading. "Sir," he said, hesitant. "They're flying like they don't think anything's out there. Same route, same time window. 12 birds, give or take, every night, sometimes 10, sometimes 14. Altitudes between 8 and 12,000. No jinking, no doglegs." "Why should they dodge?" the CO muttered. "They know we've got one damn night fighter and a radar set held together with spit." The second night was worse. Low cloud rolled in over Muro, heavy and damp. The Mir radar started losing tracks and ground clutter. Smith flew cap over the airfield again. The controller's voice crackled, faded, came back. "Night fighter Able 1, bogey, bearing, unreadable. Stand by." Smith ended that night with 2 intercept attempts. Both times, by the time Porter got a solid track, the bombers were practically overhead. The searchlights tried to find them, playing useless white cones through low cloud, flak-hammered, blind and angry. Bomb craters walked toward the fuel dumps. A lucky miss spared the main ammo park by 50 yards. "That's another dozen killed," someone said in the morning briefing, "and we're behind schedule on runway B." On the third night, an argument broke out. "Major, we need you on station over the field," the base commander said, tension behind his eyes. "You're our last line, not a roaming hunter. Let the heavies and the Marine Corsairs deal with whatever they can in daylight. At night, your job is to be here when they come." "With respect, sir," Smith answered, careful but firm. "Being here when they come means I'm already too late. They're over the field by the time we get solid radar. I can maybe peel one off, maybe. And if you run off halfway to Formosa chasing shadows, we get none peeled off," the colonel shot back. The fourth night, Porter counted 12 separate contacts on his scope over 40 minutes. They got 0 intercepts. A low groan went up in the operations shack when the numbers were tallied. The Corps of Engineers sent down a representative, mud still dried on his boots, eyes ringed with exhaustion. He didn't yell. He just asked how many more nights like this the airfield could take before someone in Tokyo decided it was easier to erase Muir from the map than risk letting it mature. It was after that fourth night that Smith stopped thinking of himself as the last line of defense and started thinking in terms of routes, streams, and schedules. The book said, protect the target. Reality said, attack the pipeline feeding it. It started with scratch marks on a map table. A crude wall map of the region around Muro hung in the operations shack, edges curling from humidity. Grease pencil lines showed friendly airfields, shipping lanes, known Japanese bases to the north. Smith and Porter stood shoulder to shoulder, their flight suits still damp from the night's humidity, as they began marking where Porter had first seen each radar contact on his scope over the last week. "First detection here," Porter said, tapping 35 miles north-northeast of Muir, altitudes around 8 to 10,000, all coming down this general bearing. He drew a line with the side of his hand, another line, and another. The pattern emerged fast. A corridor no more than 20 miles wide where almost every bomber appeared. To the northwest, empty ocean. To the northeast, more empty ocean. "They're flying a track," Smith murmured. "Not hunting. They know where we are. They know the range. They pick up a radio beacon or a nav point, then ride it straight in." The CO looked over their shoulders. "So what does that buy us, Major? We still only have one widow." "It buys us predictability," Smith said. "We stop trying to catch them over the field. We catch them on the track." "That's outside your assigned cap area," the CO replied immediately. "And almost outside the Muir radar coverage. You go 20, 30 miles out, and we lose you in clutter. We can't help you if something goes wrong." "That's the point," Smith said, more controlled than he felt. "I don't need you to hold my hand once I'm out there. I have this." He jabbed his thumb back toward the flight line, where the hulking mass of his P-61 sat half in shadow, black paint swallowing the floodlights. "The SCR-720 can see 6 miles, better in clean air. Phil's been tracking them just fine once we get in range. Ground radar gets us in the ballpark. After that, we to get ourselves." The CO frowned. "Even so, you leave the field, you leave it naked. They could change route, split their forces. You go charging off, and 12 bombers come in from a different bearing, and we've got nothing but Bofors and prayer." Porter cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect," he said, "they haven't changed their route in 2 weeks of nightly raids. Same pipeline. The Japanese think they're invisible at night. They don't know our radar exists. Why would they change it?" That was the core arrogance the 418th was counting on, the enemy's faith in darkness. The CO looked between them, jaw working. "What are you proposing exactly?" Smith took a breath. "We launch early and go north, not into a cap overhead," he said. "We let you point us generally toward first contact, but instead of falling on the closest bomber like a terrier, we push hard out toward the lead of the stream. We kill the head of the snake. You'll blow right past the others on the way." "Exactly. We run up their track until we're in front of the lead. Then we turn south, drop down to their altitude or just below, and start picking them off one by one as we work backward along the stream. Short engagements, no sightseeing, no prolonged chases." The CO stared. "You're talking about letting 11 bombers go past you, just so you can kill one at the front," he said slowly. "For the first 10 minutes, yes," Smith agreed. "But look at the timing, sir. They're strung out. 4, 5, maybe 10 miles between elements. It takes them, say, 30 minutes from first detection to bombs on target. If we intercept the lead at 50 miles out, that's 10 or 12 minutes before he'd be over us. Quick attack, don't hang around. We spin around back onto the tail of the next one as it closes. Instead of a linear 3-target night, we turn it into a rolling series of intercepts on the same corridor." "It hinges on time on station," Porter added, "which is why we stripped that turret, sir." The CO's head turned sharply. "You what?" Smith winced inwardly but pressed on. "The dorsal turret's been a problem in the Pacific," he said. "You've read the reports, crew complaints about buffeting, limited fields of fire, confusion with our own single-engine fighters. We pulled the drive motors and most of the 50 ammo. Saves us around 600 pounds. We're not using it at night against bombers anyway. Our guns are in the belly, 420s. That weight savings buys us faster climb, better acceleration, and a few minutes more effective fuel." There it was, the stupid mod, made with hacksaws and wrenches in the humid motor pool. It made their P-61 illegal on paper and uniquely suited for what they were trying to do in practice. "You reported this?" the CO asked, voice very flat. "Not in those exact terms, sir," Smith admitted. "It's not like we're turning it into a racer. We're just optimizing for the mission we're actually flying." The room held its breath. Outside, a P-61's engines coughed to life under a crew chief's tender ministrations, then died. The smell of avgas seeped in. "You're asking me," the CO said at last, "to authorize you to leave the target area, range out toward the enemy's ingress lane, rely on your own radar in partial ground radar B, blackout and run emergency power as needed in a modified airframe so you can play lone wolf with an entire bomber stream." "Yes, sir," Smith said. "Yes, sir," Porter echoed. The CO looked like a man debating whether to jump from a moving truck. Finally, he sighed. "You depart no earlier than 10 minutes before projected contact," he said. "You stay in intermittent contact with MUIR radar as long as they can see you. You do not chase any stragglers past 80 miles. I don't want to lose my only P-61 because you decided to go sightseeing over Formosa." "Yes, sir." "And Major?" The CO's eyes narrowed. "If that modified turret of yours causes any trouble, you'll be explaining it to a board of your peers, not to me." Smith nodded. "Understood, sir." They walked down to the flight line afterward, where the Widow loomed like some predatory insect in the floodlights. Ground crewmen moved around her, checking panels, topping fuel, arming guns. The stripped turret housing sat lighter, almost skeletal. Porter climbed the ladder to his radar compartment, patting the skin of the fuselage. "You really think this will work?" he asked quietly over his shoulder. Smith looked up at the night sky, clouds already rolling in, blotting out the stars. "I think," he said, "that sitting over this field waiting to be too late has definitely not worked. Time to try something stupid." He strapped in, pulled on his headset, and watched as the floodlights snapped off one by one. Somewhere far to the north, Japanese engines were already turning over. 800 miles away, in a dimly lit hangar on a strip carved out of another island, a Japanese bomber crew went through their rituals. The aircraft was a twin-engined Mitsubishi, roughly analogous to the Allied B-25. Sleek nose, slender wings, riveted skin patched in places from earlier sorties. The ground crew chalked white kanji on the bomb casings, names, prayers, sometimes jokes. Inside the cockpit, the pilot of the lead bomber, Captain Sato, checked his luminous wristwatch and signaled to his co-pilot. The mission brief had been straightforward. Night raid, 12 bombers, target the American airfields at Mindoro. Altitude 8,000 to 10,000 feet, cruise at 180 knots. Compass course, minor correction for wind. No formation lights, no radio chatter beyond absolute necessity. They had flown similar missions for weeks. Night, climb to altitude, settle into cruise. The world outside the greenhouse canopy turned to crusted ink. Under them, only the occasional faint glow of a fishing boat or burning village punctured the black. They had never seen an American night fighter. American resistance came in the form of searchlights and anti-aircraft guns. Jabos by day sometimes, if they were unlucky and late returning. But at night, the enemy's sky was dark and blind. "Do not stray," their operations officer had warned. "The route will bring you directly to the target. Timing is essential. Other units will raid other fields. The Americans are gathering ships for a major landing at Lingayen. We must delay them, damage their runways, their fuel, their supply points. Make them pay for every mile." Sato knew little about the grand strategy. He knew only fatigue and attrition. Too many friends had not come back from missions like this. Some had been hit by flak on final approach to their target. Some had disappeared over the ocean, never heard from again. The official explanation, as always, the same: enemy action or weather. No one mentioned fighters at night. It was a point of pride that the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy had rendered themselves invisible once the sun went down. F's one bomber had vanished from his string without explanation, a sudden orange glow low on the horizon. The gunners blamed ground fire. The operations officer suggested a mechanical failure. No one suggested an unseen attacker had risen out of the dark, slid under their blind tail, and hosed them with 20mm shells. Tonight, Sato's navigator bent over his maps, faint red light reflecting off his slide rule and protractor. Drift, ground speed, time to target. It was a clockwork problem executed in the dark. Altitude 8,000, the navigator said quietly. Wind from the northeast, 10 knots. Adjust heading 5 degrees starboard. The radio operator sat with headphones on, listening to the hiss and occasional pop of distant transmissions. Their formation flew in a long, loose line. 12 aircraft strung out over 20 or 30 miles. One by one, each bomber settled onto the invisible rail that would carry them to Mindoro. They could not see each other's navigation lights. They were blacked out. They stayed in station by dead reckoning and interval timing. In each bomber, gunners stared into the void, hands on their weapons. Tail gunners scanned back along the line, seeing nothing but a darker band of sky where the ocean met the heavens. The Japanese had heard rumors about a new American night fighter, something large, twin-engined, with 4 cannons. The stories came mostly from scattered signals intercepts and one shaken tail gunner who swore he'd seen red tracers sneaking up through cloud from nowhere before his aircraft was shredded. Most dismissed it as ground fire or someone flinching under stress. Americans, after all, were not supposed to see in the dark. Tonight, as the bomber stream crossed into the corridor the Americans had labeled the slot, Sato's formation flew with the quiet confidence of men who had gotten away with this before. The lead bomber key ebbed over black water toward a coastline it could not see. Behind him, a dozen little luminous compasses all pointed roughly the same way. A dozen engine pairs droned, holding the same RPM. A dozen crews glanced at their watches, calculating the time until they would be over the sleeping enemy's airfields again. None of them knew that far ahead, buried in the same black ocean of night, a single shadow with electronic eyes had just turned onto their track, climbing to meet them. To them, the sky was empty. To the radar scope in the back of Major Carroll C. Smith's P-61, the sky was full. "Lead bandit now at 8 miles, bearing 035, Porter said. His voice had lost its bantering edge. This was work now. "Angels 8, still on that same heading, same speed." Smith checked his own altimeter, 9,500 feet, and climbing slowly. Airspeed 210, nudging higher as the engines punched through humid air. They were 40 miles north of Muir now, with the base radar's voice growing fainter. "Muir radar to night fighter Able 1. We're starting to lose you in clutter. Last plot 30 degrees at 35 miles. Contacts inbound in your sector. Good hunting." "Roger, Muir," Smith replied. "We'll take it from here." He flicked the radio to a quieter channel. The world got smaller. Just him, Porter, and the green smear on a cathode ray tube. "Range 6, Porter called. "Right 10 degrees. Now, level at 10,000. He's coming down the track like he owns it." Smith rolled gently, bringing the nose around. He could feel the bomber now, an abstraction becoming a presence. Somewhere ahead, a silhouette floated in the dark, oblivious. "Range 4, slightly above us, closing at 60 knots. "Lights out," Smith said softly, though they'd been dark from takeoff. Habit. He reached for the gun switch, feeling the click through his glove. Gun's hot. The cannon bay under his feet held 4 20mm Hispano cannons, each fed by a 200-round drum. Enough ammunition if he didn't linger. Not enough if he hesitated. "Range 2, Porter said. "Contact at 1 o'clock high. Bring her left a hair. Hair more. Perfect. You're sliding up astern." He still doesn't know. Black on black, and Smith still couldn't see him. Just void. He trusted the instruments, trusted Porter's scope. "Range 1, Porter said quietly. "He's dead ahead now, slightly high, maybe 300 feet. You can start looking." Smith squinted through the canopy. At first there was nothing, then very small. Faintly he saw it, a dent in the darkness, a barely darker smudge against the sky. The slight ghostly blink of exhaust flame, dampers on the bomber's engines, visible only when his eyes were completely adjusted. Got you. He eased the Widow's nose down a fraction, sliding her under and behind the bomber to stay out of the tail gunner's cone of fire, closing. He watched the relative motion. The bomber's stubby wings were just discernible. He brought the nose up, letting the gun sight's dim ring crawl up under the silhouette. 1 second. 2. The bomber swelled in his view. He squeezed the trigger. 4 20mm cannons spat flame in the night, unseen from the ground but horribly bright up here. Tracers arced forward in a slightly converging pattern, fanning across the bomber's right engine and inner wing root. Sparks erupted. A moment later, too late to be connected but horribly coincident, the bomber's engine coughed and belched flame. Smith chopped the burst, rolled left, slipped under the stricken aircraft. He wanted no collision with falling wreckage. Through the canopy, he caught a glimpse. The bomber's right wing drooped, then tore away in a spray of burning fuel. The shape cartwheeled, became fire. "Splash one," Porter said tightly. "You're clear. No debris nearby. Next contact. We've got him. Secondary at 4 miles behind the leader, same track." "Time?" Smith asked. He risked a glance at the cockpit clock. 23:52. 12 minutes since wheels up. "Call it 8 minutes between these two when they cross this line," Porter said. "We just chopped that to 0. Now we work back." Smith grinned despite himself. "Vector? Come left 20 degrees. Descend 500 feet. He's at 9.5. Smith turned. The Widow answered like a heavy but obedient predator, black wings biting the damp air. The second intercept was messier. The bomber's tail gunner evidently saw something. Maybe the brief sparks from his leader's death, maybe a reflex. Tracer flashed back at them, dim pinpricks. Smith jinked, feeling G-forces dig into his ribs, then pulled into a climbing turn that put him slightly high and out to one side. "Range .8, Porter said. "Angle off 15. Little more lead, Major. He's not maneuvering much, just a slight weave. Must have seen the explosion ahead." Smith led the target more aggressively, using the grease-pencil deflection marks on his canopy as a rough guide. He fired a long burst, feeling the Widow vibrate. Rounds ripped through the bomber's fuselage, walking from the tail forward. The tail gun fell silent. A wing tank ignited, blowing a sheet of flame back along the fuselage. The bomber didn't explode. It began to descend in a slow, doomed spiral instead, trailing fire. Men might be alive in there, wrestling uselessly with controls. 2, Porter said. His voice cracked on the number, adrenaline bleeding through. "That's 2. And we've still got... Stand by." Smith checked the clock. 00:08. 16 minutes since the first kill. He eased the throttles back slightly. Fuel flow was heavy. The P-61's big engines were thirsty brutes, especially at high power. "How's our gas?" he asked. "Good for another. Hour 15 if you stop playing racer," Porter replied. "We've got time, but we don't have forever." "How many more on the track?" 2 strong returns behind the one we just hit," Porter said. "Call them 3 and 4, plus weaker stuff beyond that. Maybe stragglers, maybe weather ghosts. 3 is 6 miles astern of where 2 used to be. 4 is another 6 miles behind him." Smith did some fast mental math. The bombers were still 40-plus miles from Muro. Even allowing for their steady plod, he had room. "Let's keep rolling," he said. "Same plan. Short, hard hits. No hatte." Nagging around to admire the view. The third bomber died around 00:35. By then they were about 60 miles out from Muir, nearly at the edge of where any sane officer would have expected a single night fighter to roam. The horizon was a featureless nothing. Even the slight glow from Muro had vanished behind them. Porter's scope, however, was alive. The third bomber showed as a crisp blip, exactly where he should have been in the stream, unaware that the 2 ahead of him were now oil slicks and wreckage. This one jinked more aggressively when Smith made his run. Maybe the crew had gotten a garbled fragment of radio, something about explosions ahead. Tracer arced from the dorsal turret and tail. "Careful," Porter said tightly. "He's throwing more lead. You're fast, too, closing at 90 knots. Smith had the Widow at almost 260 indicated, trading altitude for speed in a shallow descent. He snapped into the bomber's blind cone, low and offset, then pulled up sharply through its level, firing a snap burst as the silhouette crossed his gun sight. He overshot, grunting as G pushed him into the seat. For an instant he saw the bomber above him, profile lit by his own muzzle flashes. His rounds stitched its belly and port engine. He rolled inverted, fell away into the dark, then righted the P-61. "Effect?" he asked. He's losing altitude," Porter said, peering at the returns. "Yeah, slowing. I think you tore something important off. Call it a probable at least." They couldn't see the impact, but as they turned back along the track, the blip representing that bomber winked out. "Make it 3, Porter said softly. Smith risked another look at the clock. 0:42. 3 bombers in just over an hour from takeoff. He felt the fatigue start to creep into his shoulders, tension held too long in one position. He forced himself to flex his fingers on the yoke. "How's your scope, Pierre?" "Oh," he asked. "Any degradation?" "Green and mean, Major," Porter said. "But we need to think about a turn point. Our max range line is coming up if you still want enough fuel for a reserve and some leeway on return." Smith's first instinct was to push on. 3 kills tasted like momentum. But 30 miles of black water separated them from the 4th bomber, and beyond that lay a vast bowl of nothing where one instrument failure could make the difference between home and oblivion. "Where's number 4?" he asked instead. Porter adjusted the gain, tracked the moving speck. 30 miles behind where 3 used to be. Call it 70 out from Muir. Still right on the pipe. Angels 8. Smith hesitated. 70 miles. It was right on the edge of what the CO had threatened over. But if he turned back now, that bomber would walk in untouched. Assuming the rest of the stream was intact, at least one enemy aircraft would bomb his sleeping airfield because he'd been cautious. He thought of the engineers on the ground, the ammo parks, the ships waiting for those runways to be finished so they could stage fighters to Lingayen. "Vector," he said. Porter's answer was immediate. "Turn left to 330. Small heading correction later for drift. He's not maneuvering. Still convinced he's alone in the universe." The intercept took 10 long minutes. In that time, nothing changed inside the cockpit except the angle of the needles. But outside, a quiet drama played out. One aircraft hunting another, both invisible to the naked eye. "Range 5, Porter said at last. "Same as before. He's below us by 200 feet. Bring it down slowly. Let's not blow past him." Smith eased the nose over. Airspeed crept up. He pushed the throttles just enough to hold their overtake. "Range 2. Coming dead ahead again. You know the drill." This time, Smith didn't wait for visual confirmation as long. He brought the Widow into position by instruments and the ghostly green echo on the scope alone, then trusted his memory of the bomber's profile. He fired a short, controlled burst, then another. The first likely missed entirely. The second found its mark. The 4th bomber flared into sudden, startling brilliance, a magnesium-white glare in the night as fuel tanks ruptured. For a moment, the inside of the P-61's cockpit lit up like day. Shadows snapped into sharp relief. Smith squinted against the flash, instinctively turning his head. Then the light vanished, replaced by after-images. "Jesus," Porter whispered. "That was... Yeah, he's gone. No return. That one went down in pieces." Silence filled the cockpit. Only the engine's distant thunder remained. "Time?" Smith asked. Porter swallowed. 0102, he said. "Call it 82 minutes since we left the runway. 4 bombers down." Smith let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Fuel?" he asked after a second. "Enough to get home if you stop joyriding," Porter said. "Suggest we turn south. Maybe we'll get lucky with a straggler, but if not, Muir's missing us." Smith banked the Widow gently, nose swinging toward a point of darkness that concealed his base. He throttled back, listening to the engine settle into a more civilized rumble. On their return leg, they passed through where the bomber stream should have been. Nothing. No more clean echoes on Porter's scope. No more threaded line of prey headed south. Either the Japanese had fewer aircraft than intelligence believed tonight, or the ones that survived had turned back, aborting in confusion after losing their lead elements. Maybe some nervous radio operator had broken silence after seeing explosions ahead, convincing his pilot to turn for home. Maybe a navigator had misread his watch and delayed an element so far they never entered the slot at all. Smith didn't know. He only knew that as they came within Muir's ragged radar coverage again, the controller's voice held a different tone. "Night Fighter Able 1, this is Muir radar. We have no remaining bogies in your sector. Say altitude and fuel." Smith gave his figures, already planning the descent. "Roger, Able 1. Be advised. Ground reports no bombs on primary runways tonight. Some sporadic flak expenditure. No confirmed enemy over field. Whatever you did out there, Major, it seems to have worked." Smith glanced at the dim shape of his hands on the yoke. They were trembling now, the adrenaline leaching out. "Copy, Muir," he said softly. "Request landing instructions." They broke through the cloud deck to see the runway lights blink briefly for their approach, a stolen moment of illumination, then darkness again. The Widow settled onto steel matting with a squeal of tires and a groan of brakes. When he finally slid the canopy back, the humid air of Muro hit him like a wall. Porter climbed down from his compartment, face pale in the dim lights. "That," he said simply, "was insane." Smith laughed once, short and hum, or less. "Yeah," he said. "Let's not make a habit of 4 in one night. 2 or 3 will do." "Well," Porter replied, "tell that to the Japanese. They're the ones who thought they were invisible." Behind them, ground crewmen were already swarming over the Black Widow, touching her skin like men, reassuring themselves that something improbable was real. Word spread faster than any official communiqué. By dawn on December 30th, everyone on Muir Field seemed to know that Smith's Widow had gone far up the slot and not come back empty. Some had heard 2 kills, some 3. The rumor that it had been 4 sounded like typical pilot exaggeration. Then the intelligence section started collecting reports. Filipino fishermen off the north coast described seeing fire in the sky after midnight, burning aircraft falling into the sea far from shore. Radio intercepts picked up confused Japanese traffic in the early morning hours, scattered references to lost contact with lead bomber, and raid group not arriving at target as scheduled. By midday, a teletype from higher headquarters arrived, carrying confirmation from other listening posts. They'd seen fragile, transient echoes on their own sets, something big and American moving in the same corridors as a Japanese raid that had never reached its objective. 4 confirmed bombers destroyed, possibly more damaged. Officially, the mission entered the squadron record as an extraordinary night of work under difficult conditions. An after-action report, written in the flat language of staff officers, noted the use of onboard radar for independent intercepts at the edge of ground radar range, the weight-saving modification to the turret, and the value of engaging a raid stream forward of its target. Unofficially, they called it a miracle. The Japanese had their own name for it. In the weeks that followed, interrogations of captured aircrew and translated fragments of operations logs revealed that some Japanese units now spoke in hushed tones of the Black Hunter that stalked their bomber lanes in the dark, an unseen, black-bodied foe that came without warning, killed silently, and vanished before gunners could bring their weapons to bear. To those who survived, the most unnerving thing was the pattern. 4 bombers simply disappeared in line over the ocean, spaced out along their ingress route. No flak, no searchlights, no visible fighters, just fire and then empty sky. Back at Muir, the engineers got another night without bombs on their heads. That meant another 24 hours of uninterrupted work on the runways and dispersal areas that would soon host fighters for the Lingayen Gulf landings. The invasion went in on schedule. No one could point to a single mission and say, this made the difference. But among the men who'd huddled in foxholes listening for the throaty rumble of Japanese bombers, the memory of that strange, mercifully quiet night stuck. Smith and Porter flew again, of course. There were always more nights, more raids, more grind. They never matched 4 bombers in 80 minutes again. Some nights they saw nothing. Some nights were near misses, ghosts on the scope that slipped away in weather or fuel margins. The turret mod, first a local hack, drifted into broader acceptance. Reports from the Pacific filtered back to stateside depots. By late 45, more Black Widows flew with their turrets either locked forward or partially stripped to save weight. The pipeline concept they had improvised over Muro, treating bomber routes as scheduled tracks to be intercepted in depth, not just near the defended target, echoed forward into post-war doctrine. In the early Cold War, with jet bombers and nuclear loads, Air Defense Command would talk about raid lanes and barrier caps, deploying radar-equipped interceptors along corridors identified by intelligence, not just orbiting over cities waiting for sirens. In a small way, the ghost of a P-61 that had hunted 4 bombers in the Philippine night lived on in those diagrams. The Black Widow itself would not. By the early 1950s, jet age swept her aside. New interceptors, F-89 Scorpions, F-94 Starfires, carried more advanced radars and unguided rockets in their bellies. Night fighting became all-weather interception, and the men who practiced it seldom thought of those first clumsy sets in the noses of twin-boomed relics. Major Carroll C. Smith went home when his tour ended. The war ground on without him. The Pacific Campaign pushed north to Okinawa and beyond. The widows of the night hunters aged with their pilots. Decades later, a Black Widow sat in a museum hangar, polished black skin reflecting fluorescent lights instead of searchlights. Children stared at its insectoid face, at the antennae sprouting from its nose, at the turret that on some aircraft had never really pulled its weight. An older man, hair gone iron gray, might stand back from the crowd, looking not at the display placard, but at the faint lines of the canopy rails. He might remember the feel of grease pencil marks under his gloved hand, the hum of a radar set behind his seat, the weight of thousands of sleeping men below him, trusting a machine no enemy believed was real. He would know that his stupid idea, stripping a turret, pushing a radar farther than the manual said, chasing a bomber stream out where no one could save him, had not been genius or madness in itself. It had been something simpler, older, a refusal to accept that the enemy's assumptions about the dark would go unchallenged. In war, the line between a reckless stunt and a necessary innovation is drawn in blood and survival. The field mods, the unauthorized chalk marks, the unofficial tactics, they live or die with the men who try them. Sometimes they die quietly and are never spoken of again. Sometimes 4 bombers vanish in 80 minutes, and a few thousand men wake up the next morning on an airfield that T is still there. History rarely remembers the exact night. It remembers campaigns, invasions, outcomes. But in the black sky over Muro, on one December night in 1944, a single P-61 Black Widow wrote its own small line in that larger story, proving that for all the doctrine and diagrams, the war in the dark still came down to one airframe, one radar scope, and one crew willing to gamble everything on a plan that wasn't in any book. And somewhere in that thin space between risk and necessity, the enemy learned that even at midnight over the Pacific, they were not alone.